I used to make all of these videos on a Windows 7 computer. Like, I was using Windows 7 until, sometime in 2020, I made the switch over to Linux. And it was because I actually got a new computer. There was a computer that was gifted to me by a friend of mine that I went to go stay with in the state of Virginia. Or is it the Commonwealth of Virginia? I think it's actually a Commonwealth. It's a state, though, at the same time. They just want to be special. But, you know, Virginia is for lovers. Shouts out, represent. Um, Decent place, although it is too hot. I was over there because they had offered to, in retrospect, essentially take care of me because I had just turned 18. I had no high school education, no job experience, was coming from a pretty precarious home situation, didn't have any income of my own because my disability was, you know, being taken from me by my father. Um, he was receiving all of it. I wasn't receiving any of it. So I was in a pretty difficult situation, no independence. And it was one of the nicest things anyone has ever done for me, especially when you consider the context at the time, like the fact that I was 18 years old, never had a good computer, never really had anything expensive of my own. Like, yeah, I had game consoles, I had video games, but it was all retro stuff. Like, I didn't even have a PS4 or anything like that. Like, nothing that was current at the time. I remember I bought a PS4, and then my fucking dad came in my room and took it from me, you know? And I bought that with my own money. In, 2019, he just came in and fucking took it from me. But, um, I got the computer, and it was like this brilliant experience being able to play GTA 5 and some of the Steam games that I had gotten in sales that I had really wanted to play, but didn't think I'd necessarily be able to. Um, I didn't think I'd ever have a nice enough computer to play some of the modern stuff. It's funny thinking about that game as modern now because it came out in 2013. But that was like the definitive experience with that game for me because I had only played it on the Xbox 360. But um, I ended up using Linux on that computer because the Windows 10 version that uh, it had come with was really unstable. I don't know if it was an issue with the hardware or what, but the computer had this weird problem where it would turn itself off or it just wouldn't, boot up without saying CMOS fail. Um, and we took the CMOS chip out and put a new one in, and it still kept doing that CMOS fail thing. So what ended up fixing it was me putting Ubuntu on there. And I think because Linux is compatible with a wide variety of hardware, it literally just fixed the problem. Like, whatever was being miscommunicated, it just got fixed. And I don't necessarily know the reason for why, but sometimes it's just doing little things like that fixes computers. And I was using Linux on my desktop ever since. Of course, prior to that, I had the Windows 7 machine, and it wasn't a good machine. Like, it wasn't a gaming rig, an older one, or anything like that. The best it could run was like CSGO and TF2, and even then it could barely run those games. It would run them at like 20 frames a second, And that's how I used to play those games. I'd play those games at 20 FPS, 19 FPS, um, on that desktop running fucking Windows 7. But I also recorded my videos using that thing. I did my live streams using that thing. The video you're seeing before you is one of them, although it's not exactly visible on the camera. You can only see a vague outline, but it is there. I remember having OBS set up and optimizing like how I wanted the stream to look and everything, and being so surprised that that software actually worked on that computer because again it was just a rickety old piece of shit. Like it had to have been $70 off of eBay or something, and it came refurbished. All the hardware was like the internal hardware, like it didn't have a graphics card or something, it had integrated graphics. So it was scuffed as hell, but that's what I was using to make my videos. And I would have to wait 6, 7, 8 hours for videos to render. And for the most part, it would lock up my computer. Like, I didn't want it to necessarily crash, the video editor, that is. So I would generally stay away from the PC while stuff was rendering, but sometimes I could get away with just using Discord in the background or doing very minimal web browsing. It only made the process like a little bit slower, like it might add 30 minutes or 45 minutes onto the process, and a lot of the time I'd just bear through it. I'd just be like, whatever. Um, but in general, I left it alone when my videos were rendering, and I rendered them in standard definition, not just because I liked the aesthetic of standard definition. It was also because like I had to. There wasn't an option other than that. I would do 720p at most, and it would add like over an hour onto the editing process. So I'd just be like, fuck it, I'm going to do standard def on most of my stuff. And on the really long videos, I'd have to render them in like 240p in order to like reliably render the shit. Um, I often did the same thing whenever I had to render something on my phone because I had like a S8 Plus at the time, something like that. Um, S8 Lite, some weird shit like that. Like it was the smaller version of the Plus. That's what I used. Um, and of course, that thing doesn't have the most RAM, so trying to render a video in UCut on there would be pretty annoying. I just render it in the lowest possible definitions, um, lowest resolution, lowest frame rate. But generally speaking, I'd use the Sony Vegas, and on there it's like, yeah, you just put 480p, 30 FPS, and boom, you're good. Um, by the way, wouldn't it be so much better if YouTube could handle 480p 60 FPS? I wish their encoding allowed for that. I feel like my creative freedom has been restricted so much because of the fact that it works that way, but I digress. Um, yeah, yeah, I look back on that time with a lot of favorable, warm feelings. It was a nice time, but it was also a very bad time in some ways. Um, it was also a very innocent time, and I can't really get back the innocence that I associate with that time because certain things have happened, right? Like, I'm not going to go into every single thing individually, but I've had to see some shit since I was 17, 18, you know? Like, back then, I was just reading all these image boards, watching all this anime, smoking weed from time to time, and focusing on my videos, making my videos. I was totally obsessed with the world of YouTube, and I was relatively undisturbed in doing that. Like, my dad was at work most of the time or just out of the house, so I could be left alone, and I really didn't like being around him or want to spend time with him. And so it felt almost like living alone a lot of the time, which made me feel pretty good about my life. And the fact that I could engage in all my interests, you know, only made things better. And that was the first time I could really feel freedom like that. And you couple that with the relative innocence that I was experiencing at the time, like the fact that I hadn't been in so many violent, dangerous situations, been homeless, um, had to deal with like adult melodrama and relationship issues and things like that. You know, it's something that you look back on with fondness, because you're not just remembering being happy, you're remembering being happy while having a certain perspective on the world, a perspective that's not tainted by the terrible things that you end up experiencing over the course of your life, right? So I think that's why I come back to these videos sometimes and I try to remember what I was like and what things were like, because I didn't have to see some of the things that I ended up seeing, you know? I didn't have to see somebody die, you know? Um, it's like I was just, I guess I can tell this story because it's just a small thing, you know. One time I walked by a homeless person in a busy area. I was just walking by, the guy just died. You know, it was discussed. It was pointed out. People were panicked. A guy just dies. And that's on the much milder side. That's something that, you can reasonably expect a lot of Americans to see. But I never had to see anything like that. I had been in hospitals or by hospice care and seen people who were in my family die, actually watch them drift off with the whole family there. And that was kind of a, different experience. That was kind of a communal experience where we could all grieve together. But when it's just some random person and when it's totally preventable and then you see that happen, as you're just walking around, I mean, it's a totally different story. I think it messes with your brain a little bit to have seen something like that because it's sad. And again, that's on the very, very milder side of the stuff that I ended up seeing as I got older. And that stuff changed my thinking. It changed how I saw the world, and I think it changed how I experienced the world to an extent. And not to a large extent, but my perspective certainly changed. I'm still able to enjoy things, I think, in a relatively naive, if you want to call it that way. I would call it a pure way, thankfully, but my perspective has certainly changed. And I don't think it's uncommon for people to experience moments of longing for a time when their perspective was different, right? Um, so I can start to fixate on these different details of my past, seemingly mundane or erroneous details. I believe I fixate on them partially because of this desire to uh, go back to a time when my perspective was more naive or less hardened, you know? And needless to say, there was also some beauty in the limitations of my youth. Like, obviously, when you're a kid, you're poor and you don't have much. And so you end up needing to make your own fun out of the things that you do have. If you're an artist or a creator of some kind, you end up needing to make stuff with what you have. You can't be limited by your tools if you want to have fun and be creative. So you have to learn how to command them in a way that will suit the project. And if that means adapting the project in some way, then you've got to get creative there too, which can be fun in and of itself. Like, there's a lot of creativity that stems directly from limitations either imposed on a person or just natural limitations because of the tools that you're working with. Um, and I think by having these old, like, shitbox computers, like a laptop that was shitting itself, that was literally just like a shitty HP notebook. I think it was HP at least. It had this logo that looked like a swan or something on it. Um, it was really bad. That game ran TF2 at a slightly higher frame rate, but it was still under 30 FPS, so not really. Um, I wasn't able to do much with it. Um, but I used it, right? And it crashed constantly because the guy who had gave it to me as a gift liked the smell of burning electronics. He would heat up his electronics so he could sniff the fumes of them burning. He was schizophrenic. I think he's a she now or something. That's what I've heard. But I haven't spoken with, I guess I'll just say them, in over 5 years. So I don't know for sure. That's what I've been told. Um, of course, when I knew them, they were a he, so I'm going to go with that because I'm talking about the past here. But yeah, he liked the smell of burning electronics, and that was kind of strange, right? Um, they gave me the computer that they used to burn to smell the fumes from, and that was my other computer. It's just a really shitty laptop that was made shittier by the fact that it had heat damage. My desktop, needless to say, was what I used most of the time. I had like, I want to say Mint, or I think I had Manjaro at one point. I had a bunch of different distros that I tried out on that notebook machine. And I was pretty much always using Linux on there because that was the most stable, like, lightweight thing I could do. Windows was just a nightmare on that thing. It made everything so slow. Um, but I was rocking Windows 7 on that other one, and I think Windows 7 actually had stopped security updates or something, like around the time I was still using it, or I think it had stopped like a couple years before I stopped using it. Might have been like 2017 or something it stopped, not 2020, but I didn't really care because I always used HTTPS and I had a hardened version of Firefox that I was using if I wasn't using Pale Moon. And I had like a lot of security plugins like Ghostery and stuff like that. And I didn't visit websites that were, shady. I wasn't installing executables or anything. So I figured I was in a pretty good position. Um, the most you might run into is like, I think 8chan back in the day sometimes had malicious ads. I don't remember if that's true or not, but all that stuff was blocked, by my plugins. Never saw any of it. So, actually, I think 8chan didn't have ads back in the day. It was 8kun that ended up having ads, and I think some of those were malicious, but I didn't really use that website after it got introduced because it just wasn't the same. Didn't have the same feeling. But, damn, I've had it on. I'm gonna have burn in if I have this image on the screen for any longer. I didn't even realize that I've been talking for 20 fucking minutes. You can't have the same picture on a screen for 20 minutes when you're using a CRT. You can't do that. Um, it's bad. I'm gonna put it on, at least, at least if it's on, this game's intro screen, it'll have a moving picture on the screen, which is better than just having the same fucking thing on the screen. Um, Man, what was I gonna say? I got so tripped out by the idea of burn-in the screen. Oh god, the Sega logo doesn't look right now. Did burn-in happen in 20 minutes? There's no way it happened in 20 minutes, right? It didn't fuck up my picture quality, did it? No, I think it looks okay. I think I'm just tripping. Man, I could have sworn it looked it looked different than this when I watched the same exact intro the other day. Anyway, um, uh, fuck, what was I gonna say? I completely lost track of my thoughts now. I got so noided out by that. But anyway, um, yeah, I don't know, man. I think I think it was an interesting time, but I certainly had limitations. Like, I think it was when I was making laundromats are cool. Like the editor crashed a couple times, and there were certain edits that I made specifically as a result of losing my other edits, I think. Actually, I may be remembering that totally wrong. I might be thinking of a different video. But either way, it was a good time. It was very fun. I don't really have interest in making videos that are like that one anymore, though. Like back then, I had these specific stories of like things, eventful things that had happened in my life. Because the idea of an eventful thing happening was so new to me that like I I felt immensely inspired by that stuff, but I ended up just having such a crazy life afterward that yeah, the idea of writing about it seemed reasonable to me, and I still do that. I ended up doing it more, but um, making like a big production out of it like that one, it seems like more of a distant concept for me. Um, that kind of video is one that it's possible I'll revisit, but it's possible that I never will, simply because I don't have the same juice for it anymore. I don't have the same um, dying need to express certain things about certain events. Um, Back then, I really, really felt as though I had to get something off my chest, and these days, seldom do I feel that way. I just kind of exist. And I feel good about existing, right? Like I wake up every day and I feel pretty satisfied and happy. I go to sleep satisfied even when I have a lot of trouble sleeping multiple days in a row. I still feel good about my existence. Um, Whereas back then, it really felt like I had certain things I needed to get off my chest that I needed to say to the world. I don't ever feel like that anymore. I don't feel like there are things that the world needs to hear from me per se. I'll have certain things that I'm like, oh, this would be really fun to talk about. Or I'll have certain things like, I've never heard anyone talk about this thing in this way, or bring up this point or this angle. I should go do that so that, we can start a discussion. And then it's about like having a discussion with people, or it's about adding to the existing discussion. I just feel like my motivations have changed. And, the steady march of time moves along. People change. You can't live in the past, though you can indulge in it sometimes, which is what I did over the course of this video. I indulged in the past. And now I'm gonna spend some time in the present by playing this video game.